Live TV can seem safe and polished, but some broadcasts spiral into pure nightmare. Accidents, shocking chaos, and moments that left the world gasping happened in real time, unfiltered and unforgettable. These clips show the unexpected, the horrifying, and the impossible happening right on your screen. Dare to witness the raw side of broadcasting? This is 2 hours of most disturbing moments in live TV history. It was 1979 in Clearwater, Florida, when a new Christian-themed kids show called Joy Junction aired on the Christian television network. It featured colorful characters like Sheriff Don, Professor Clodhopper, Whittler Dan, and a ventriloquist named Ron, who performed with his puppet Marty. The show focused on fun and faith, teaching kids about values, kindness, and staying away from bad influences. The show quickly became popular. Parents loved its wholesome message, and kids enjoyed the songs, games, and lessons. Soon, Joy Junction expanded nationally, airing on major Christian networks like Trinity Broadcasting and FamilyNet. It ran for nearly 20 years, from 1979 into the early 2000s, reaching thousands of homes. And then, without warning, it disappeared. No final episode, no announcement, no reruns. It just vanished. Years later, curious fans tried to find clips online. Some had old VHS recordings, but aside from that, there was nothing. No official archive, no digital version, no trace of the show's existence. Eventually, the reason became clear. Among the cast was Ronald William Brown, the ventriloquist who played Ron alongside his puppet, Marty. On the show, the two spoke about resisting temptation and staying on the right path. Brown was also active in his local Largo, Florida church community. He regularly hosted puppet shows, gave kids rides to church in the church van, and even invited them over for pizza before Bible study. To many parents, he seemed kind and trustworthy. But behind that image, something much darker was happening. In 1998, police stopped Brown and found children's underwear in his vehicle. He claimed they were props for his puppets, and authorities let him go. No further action was taken. Years passed without incident, until 2012. That year, investigators were looking into an online network involved in disturbing activities. They came across a man from Kansas named Michael Arnett. When they searched his computer, they found highly inappropriate images involving children, some posed in staged settings. These pictures raised major concerns, but what really stood out were the chat logs. Arnett had been exchanging messages with a man in Florida. That man was Ronald Brown. The two had been talking for months on a hidden forum. Their conversations went beyond possession of inappropriate content. They included detailed and graphic discussions involving children, with Brown referencing a boy he knew personally from church. He spoke of deeply troubling intentions, sharing diagrams and pictures he had secretly taken of the child. In one exchange, Arnett asked how the boy was doing. Brown replied that he was well, but added that he wished the child was tied up in his closet. Arnett responded by saying the boy would be a fine Easter feast. They also discussed ways to target unsupervised children, suggesting neighborhoods where they believed kids might be easier to approach. Brown even said he believed he could go through with it, though the preparation would be the hardest part. On July 19, 2012, authorities raided Brown's home in Largo. What they found was deeply alarming. Thousands of illegal files were discovered, some involving deceased children. They also found written plans, drawings, and content dating back to 1978, a year before Joy Junction began. Investigators also found a missing child's flyer. The child looked very similar to someone in Brown's collection, raising further concerns, though no charges were filed in that case. Brown was arrested and charged with possession and intent to commit serious harm against a minor. He admitted to the chats but claimed it was all fantasy and that he never planned to act on it. The court didn't believe him. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, essentially a life sentence given his age and health. In 2020, Brown died in prison at the age of 65 due to complications from a neurological illness. After his arrest, everything connected to Joy Junction went silent. Networks removed all traces of the show. There were no statements, no press releases. Even cast members distanced themselves. For a long time, the show became lost media. Only a few clips survived, mainly from old VHS tapes uploaded to YouTube. In one, Ron and Marty warn children about bad thoughts and negative influences. Watching it now feels unsettling, knowing who was really behind the puppet. Ronald Brown wasn't just a performer. He was trusted by parents, surrounded by children, and active in the community. That's what makes this case so disturbing. He hid behind faith and performance, using it to mask something far more serious. And once the truth came out, the legacy of Joy Junction vanished with him. It was September 27, 2007 in Yangon, Myanmar. For 10 days, crowds had taken to the streets in peaceful protest. Buddhist monks in red robes led the demonstrations, walking calmly and chanting for freedom. What began as protests against rising fuel prices had become something much bigger. People were now calling for democracy. Many were frustrated with poverty, military rule, and the lack of basic rights. But the military government saw these gatherings not as peaceful, but as a direct threat. They issued a clear warning: leave in 10 minutes or face the consequences. The protesters didn't move. In the middle of all this was 50-year-old Kenji Nagai, a Japanese journalist who had arrived just 2 days earlier. He worked for a small outlet called APF News. Kenji had spent years reporting from dangerous places: Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine. His mission was always the same: go where others wouldn't and show what was really happening. That morning, Kenji stood near the Sule Pagoda in downtown Yangon. The area was full of protesters, some waving flags with the peacock symbol linked to Aung San Suu Kyi's political party. Despite the tense mood, the crowd remained peaceful until military trucks showed up. Soldiers got out holding rifles and shields. Protesters stayed put, some yelling at the troops. Then came the military's response. First tear gas, then gunfire, first into the air, then directly into the crowd. Kenji kept filming. His last recorded words were caught on camera. The army has just arrived. The army is over there. They are heavily armed. Then the shooting began. Kenji was hit and fell to the ground. Even then, witnesses say he continued to hold up his camera, trying to document what was happening around him. A photo by Reuters photographer Idris Latif captured a haunting scene. Kenji lying on the ground, a soldier standing over him, rifle in hand. His camera was still in his grip. In the next frame, the soldier walked away. Kenji didn't move again. At first, the Myanmar government claimed he had been caught in the crossfire, but video evidence later showed the truth. A soldier had pushed Kenji to the ground and shot him at close range. An autopsy in Japan confirmed this. The bullet had gone through his chest, hit his heart, and exited from his back. Kenji was the only foreigner to lose his life during the protests. At least 9 others also died, and more than 10 were seriously hurt. In the days that followed, the military raided monasteries and arrested over 100 monks. At one location, soldiers drove a vehicle through the gates and used force against those inside. Blood was left behind as proof. In Mandalay, another major religious center was surrounded, trapping hundreds of monks inside. The protests didn't fade. They were shut down by fear. News of Kenji's death shocked people in Japan. The government demanded answers. Prime Minister Yasuo Fukuda called it extremely unfortunate, while the foreign minister pushed Myanmar's UN representatives for accountability. Myanmar later apologized, but no action was taken. Kenji's sister, Noriko Ogawa, spent years asking for his missing camera. Witnesses had said a soldier took it. There was no word until 2023. 16 years later, journalists from the banned Democratic Voice of Burma said they had received Kenji's camera from someone who wanted to set things right. For safety, they shared no other details. The camera was returned to Noriko in Bangkok. Watching the footage gave her peace. She saw her brother calmly reporting just before everything changed. She said, "I think my brother was waiting for this day too. I want to bring it to his grave." That final footage was shown at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. It captured the protests, the chants, the chaos, and Kenji's final moments. No one has ever been held accountable, but Kenji's work hasn't been forgotten. In 2009, the Burma Media Association created the Kenji Nagai Award to honor journalists in Myanmar. The first person to receive it was Aint Kaing U, a female Burmese reporter. Kenji's final act was showing the truth. 16 years later, his camera finished what he started. On August 23, 2010, a tragic hostage situation unfolded in Manila, Philippines. A former police officer, Rolando Mendoza, hijacked a tourist bus in Rizal Park, holding 25 people captive. Mendoza, 55, had been dismissed from the Philippine National Police, or PNP, months earlier due to allegations of extortion. Believing he was unfairly removed, he took over the bus, hoping to get his job back. What started as a protest soon turned into a catastrophe, leading to the deaths of 8 hostages and raising serious concerns about the police response and media coverage. Mendoza's demands were straightforward. He wanted his dismissal overturned and his name cleared. Negotiators initially made progress, leading to the release of several hostages. The bus carried 22 Hong Kong tourists and 3 Filipino locals, including the driver, a guide, and a photographer. As the standoff stretched over 11 hours, Mendoza grew increasingly agitated. Inside the bus, he had access to a television and watched as his brother, Gregorio Mendoza, was arrested live on air. Gregorio, also a police officer, had tried to mediate, but authorities suspected him of being involved. Seeing his brother taken away pushed Mendoza over the edge. His frustration turned to aggression. and the situation rapidly worsened. One of the hostages, Mrs. Leung, later recounted how her husband tried to stop Mendoza, but was killed in the process. Despite witnessing the horror, she held on, determined to survive for her children. The situation became more dangerous as Mendoza issued threats over the radio, stating that he had already harmed hostages and would not hesitate to do more. Authorities eventually decided to intervene. A police assault team attempted to breach the bus, but the operation was chaotic and poorly executed. Mendoza, watching the news coverage, was aware of every move they made. The media had been broadcasting the standoff nonstop, unintentionally providing Mendoza with critical information. As the assault team moved in, gunfire erupted. Police hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. They attempted to break in through the back door but were met with more shots. After hours of failed rescue attempts, snipers were finally ordered to take action. Mendoza was fatally shot, but by then, 8 hostages had already lost their lives. When the standoff ended, survivors emerged from the bus, many injured and in shock. Emergency responders rushed to help, but the damage had already been done. The incident left many questioning whether the deaths could have been prevented. The police's slow response and lack of coordination became the focus of national outrage. Alberto Lubang, the bus driver, managed to escape and alert authorities about the grim reality inside. He ran towards the police, yelling that everyone was dead. His chilling statement underscored the severity of the tragedy. The crisis sparked international backlash, especially in Hong Kong, where families of the victims demanded accountability. The Philippine government issued a formal apology, but tensions between the two regions remained strained. The investigation into the incident revealed several critical failures, particularly in how the police handled the situation. Philippine Justice Secretary Leila de Lima led the inquiry, calling top officials to testify. It became clear that the police had little experience in managing high-risk hostage situations. One major misstep was not taking out Mendoza earlier, when opportunities were available. Additionally, the live media coverage gave Mendoza an advantage, keeping him informed of police tactics in real time. The inquiry concluded that authorities made serious errors, resulting in unnecessary loss of life. As a consequence, several officers, including Manila Police Chief Superintendent Rodolfo Magtibay, were either suspended or demoted. The lack of proper crisis management was widely criticized, with many believing that better planning could have saved lives. The Philippine government later introduced measures to prevent similar incidents. Specialized police training programs were launched, including the National Tourist-Oriented Police for Community Order and Protection. These efforts aim to improve law enforcement's ability to handle high-risk situations, particularly those involving foreign tourists. Despite these reforms, the tragedy remains one of the darkest moments in the country's history. The pain of the survivors and the families of the victims continues, with many still seeking closure. The harrowing images from that day, terrified hostages, desperate pleas, and the failed rescue, are a painful reminder of how one crisis can change lives forever. The Manila hostage crisis exposed critical failures in crisis response, negotiation tactics, and media ethics. While lessons have been learned, the devastating loss of innocent lives remains an irreversible tragedy. It was January 11, 2001, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The set of Xuxa Park, a popular children's TV show, was filled with excitement as an episode was being filmed. Hosted by Brazilian pop star Xuxa Meneghel, the show had an audience of about 300 people, mostly children. The set was designed like an amusement park, with bright colors, games, and performances. But what was supposed to be a fun day quickly turned into a terrifying ordeal. As Xuxa and her dancers performed a closing musical number, a small fire started in a spaceship prop, a key feature of the show. This spaceship was used for Xuxa's grand entrances and exits. At first, the flames seemed minor. A stagehand grabbed a fire extinguisher to put it out, but instead of stopping, the fire spread rapidly. Within moments, the flames engulfed the set, feeding on plastic decorations. Thick smoke filled the air, making it difficult to see or breathe. Panic broke out as the audience and crew rushed toward the exits. The intense heat melted parts of the set, and in the chaos, some children got trapped. One of the most frightening moments was when a young girl named Thamires became stuck on a Ferris wheel prop. Seeing this, Xuxa's bodyguard, Leah Nilsson, ran back through the flames to rescue her. He managed to get her to safety, but the fire continued to spread. Despite the panic, some cameras kept rolling, capturing the disaster as it unfolded. The footage later aired on Brazilian news channels, shocking the public. Firefighters eventually got the blaze under control, but by then, the damage was severe. A total of 26 people were injured, most suffering from smoke inhalation. Among them were 2 children, aged 7 and 10, who sustained severe burns. An adult who had helped with rescues was also badly hurt. Many others, while physically unharmed, were left traumatized by the experience. Shusha, though not physically injured, was deeply affected. She had always been known for her strong bond with children, and witnessing such a disaster firsthand took a heavy emotional toll on her. She later visited the victims in the hospital, offering support as they recovered. Investigators determined that the fire was caused by an electrical short circuit in the spaceship prop. There was no evidence of foul play, but the damage was done. The show, which had been airing since 1994, was immediately put on hold. Shusha Park never returned. The network, Globo, made the decision to cancel the show permanently. 8 unaired episodes were scrapped out of respect for the victims. The set was completely destroyed, and Shusha never resumed her role in children's television in the same way again. The aftermath was devastating for everyone involved. The fire left deep emotional scars, and for the injured children, the road to recovery was long. The incident became one of the most shocking moments in Brazilian TV history. Though no lives were lost, the fire marked the end of an era. Shusha Park was once a place of joy and laughter, but after that day, it became a painful memory. For Shusha and the children who had grown up watching her, things would never be the same again. On September 28, 2012, millions of viewers watching Fox News witnessed an unexpected and deeply unsettling event. A high-speed police chase in Phoenix, Arizona had been airing live, but no one could have predicted how it would end. That morning, 33-year-old Jodan F. Romero, a man with a history of legal troubles, was already wanted for violating parole on a past weapons charge. Around 11 a.m., he stole a car at gunpoint in a Phoenix parking lot, setting off an intense police chase. Authorities quickly located the stolen copper-colored sedan, and officers followed as Romero sped through city streets, ran red lights, and endangered other drivers. To reduce risk, police pulled back, choosing to track him from a distance using unmarked cars and a helicopter. However, the situation escalated further when Romero fired at officers during the chase. At one point, he even aimed at a news helicopter filming the pursuit. Fortunately, no one was injured, but the danger was clear. Eventually, Romero left the city and drove into the desert, west of Phoenix. He veered off the highway and onto a dirt road as the Fox News helicopter continued filming. Millions of viewers watched live as he abandoned the car and began walking down an empty road. His movements became increasingly unsteady. Inside the Fox News studio, anchor Shepard Smith, who had been narrating the chase, grew uneasy. "This scares me," he admitted, clearly anticipating something unsettling. Then, in a moment no one expected, Romero suddenly collapsed. He briefly checked his torso, got back up, and made a fateful decision. He took out a handgun, and in full view of the cameras, ended his life. The control room at Fox News reacted immediately. Shepard Smith, visibly shaken, shouted, "Get off! Get off! Get off!" Believing the live feed had a delay that would allow producers to cut the footage in time. But there was no delay. The scene aired unedited, exposing millions of viewers to the tragic moment. After a commercial break, Smith returned and issued a heartfelt apology. He explained that Fox News had intended to prevent such distressing footage from airing, but had made a critical error. "We really messed up, and we're all very sorry," he admitted. Fox News executives also released a public statement, calling the broadcast a result of severe human error. While the network acknowledged its mistake, the damage was done. Viewers were shocked, but for Romero's family, the impact was far worse. Romero left behind 3 children, ages 9, 13, and 15. They were at school when rumors of the live broadcast began spreading among their classmates. After school, the 2 older boys searched online and found the footage. At first, they had no idea who the man in the video was, but as they watched, the horrifying realization set in. It was their father. The emotional impact on Romero's children was devastating. The older boys were so traumatized that they never returned to school. They struggled with nightmares, flashbacks, and overwhelming distress. Their mother, Angela Rodriguez, later described how the boys' mental health deteriorated after witnessing their father's final moments on the internet. Rodriguez took legal action against Fox News, arguing that the network's mistake had caused her children severe emotional harm. She sought compensation, stating that the broadcast had exposed them to something no child should ever have to see. The incident sparked intense debate over the ethics of live news coverage, especially during dangerous events. Police chases often attract large audiences, and networks compete for ratings, but many questioned whether broadcasting these incidents live was worth the risk. Critics argued that networks prioritized entertainment over public responsibility, and the failure to censor Romero's final moments only fueled the controversy. Beyond the media's responsibility, the case also raised broader concerns about the long-term effects of such exposure. Romero's children were not the only ones affected. Viewers across the country had witnessed something they were never meant to see. The psychological toll on both his family and the public highlighted the dangers of unfiltered live reporting. While Romero's actions that day were serious, the way his life ended, broadcasted without warning to millions, sparked conversations about ethical journalism. Should stricter guidelines be in place to prevent tragic events from being shown to the public? The events of September 28, 2012, left a lasting impact. For Romero's family, it was a deeply personal tragedy. For news networks, it was a lesson in responsibility. And for viewers, it was a moment that could never be unseen. November 5, 2006, in Terrell, Texas. Louis William Bill Conrad Jr. was a 56-year-old assistant district attorney with a long-standing reputation for professionalism and hard work. On the surface, his life seemed stable and quiet, but behind the scenes, events had already been set in motion that would lead to a tragic and highly publicized end. Earlier that year, NBC's To Catch a Predator, working with the activist group Perverted Justice and the Murphy, Texas police, had launched a sting operation targeting adults who were trying to communicate inappropriately with minors online. Volunteers posed as underage children in chat rooms and waited for adults to initiate conversations. If a meeting was arranged, the men would be invited to a decoy house, where they'd be confronted by the show's host, Chris Hansen, and arrested by local police. Unbeknownst to Conrad, he had been communicating with one of these decoys, believing he was talking to a 13-year-old boy. Though he never showed up at the meeting spot, his chats were enough to place him under investigation. By November 4th, Conrad had stopped responding online and deleted his profile, likely realizing he'd been caught. This raised concerns among both law enforcement and the show's producers. Just after midnight on November 5th, Chris Hansen contacted the Murphy Police Department and pushed to take further action. Despite the fact that Conrad had never appeared at the bait house, a search warrant was requested for his home in Terrell. There were serious problems with the warrant. It listed the wrong city, county, and date, but the operation continued anyway. Around 2 p.m., a SWAT team was deployed to Conrad's house. They tried to contact him by phone and at the door, but there was no response. At 2:40 p.m., officers forced their way in. Inside the house, they found material linking Conrad to the online conversations. As they moved through the home, they saw him at the end of a hallway. Conrad said he didn't want to hurt anyone. Moments later, he used a gun he owned to take his own life before officers could intervene. Emergency responders airlifted him to a hospital, but he was declared dead not long after. The entire operation had been filmed by the To Catch a Predator crew. Although the footage wasn't aired immediately, cameras had recorded nearly everything, including the raid and the aftermath. The line between law enforcement and entertainment had blurred in a disturbing way. Conrad's death sparked serious backlash. Legal experts, journalists, and the public began questioning the choices made by both the police and NBC. Many were alarmed by the decision to send a SWAT team to arrest someone who hadn't made direct threats and who hadn't even shown up to the bait house. Some critics felt that the sting operation prioritized ratings over responsibility. Even the police department faced internal problems. One detective, Jimmy Patterson, was mistakenly detained by his own colleagues after leaving the sting house, highlighting the confusion and chaos of the entire setup. Soon after, Conrad's sister, Patricia, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against NBC Universal. She argued that the show had gone too far and that its producers, along with police, had ignored the serious risks involved. The case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. In the years that followed, To Catch a Predator stopped airing new episodes, and many began to question the ethics of public sting operations involving media. While the goal may have been to protect others, the way this case unfolded raised difficult questions about accountability, privacy, and the cost of making law enforcement part of a TV show. Louis Conrad's story is a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control when public exposure becomes part of the justice process, and how even well-intentioned actions can lead to outcomes no one wanted. It was July 2020 in Hangzhou, China. Lai Huili, a 51-year-old woman, had disappeared without warning. She was last seen on July 4th, returning home after running errands with her daughter. Her husband, Xu Guoli, 55, said he woke up the next morning and found her gone. He reported her missing and later appeared on TV, looking calm but worried, asking the public for help. Her disappearance quickly gained national attention. Xu's public appearances made him seem like a devastated husband, but behind the scenes, investigators were uncovering troubling inconsistencies. On July 6th, Lai's daughter contacted the police, reporting that her mother hadn't returned or made contact. Xu told police that July 4th had been uneventful. They had dinner, watched TV, and helped their daughter with homework. He claimed he woke at 5:30 a.m. on July 5th and found her missing. But surveillance footage told a different story. Police launched a large-scale investigation, reviewing over 6,000 hours of security footage from the Sanbao Beiyuan residential area where they lived. Cameras showed Lai returning home on July 4th, but not leaving afterward. She had vanished inside the building. Xu kept appearing on TV, pleading for answers, but his story didn't add up. Investigators grew more suspicious as they realized there was no evidence of Lai leaving the complex. Then, on July 22nd, police found human remains in the building's septic tank. The tank was drained over 25 hours using 38 trucks. Lab tests later confirmed the remains belonged to Lai Huili. Her body had been hidden in the most unthinkable place, right in the community where she lived. The next day, Xu was taken into custody. He stuck to his story at first, insisting his wife had left on her own, but under further questioning, he confessed. Xu admitted he had drugged Lai's milk with sleeping pills on the night of July 4th. Once she was asleep, he ended her life. Then, using tools he had bought in advance, he dismembered her body inside their apartment. Xu said he acted out of deep personal and financial stress. Afterward, he tried to cover everything up. He filed a missing person report, offered a reward, and made several TV appearances pretending to be a desperate husband. All the while, he knew exactly what had happened. According to Xu, he had become overwhelmed with pressure, mainly from financial issues, property investments losing value, and the rising costs of their daughter's education. Although he claimed he still cared for his wife, he said resentment had built up over time. Police later confirmed that Xu had carefully planned everything. He bought tools in advance and thought he could avoid leaving evidence, but his plan unraveled under the weight of the investigation. Xu went on trial at the Hangzhou Intermediate People's Court. The court found that he had acted with full intent and called the act especially cruel, not just because of what happened, but also because of how he misled the public. On July 26, 2021, Xu was sentenced to death. His sentence was upheld by the Supreme People's Court, and he was executed in March 2023. The case became one of China's most shocking in recent memory. The Sanbao Beiyuan complex, once quiet and ordinary, turned into a place marked by fear. Neighbors were shaken. Some moved out. Others invited monks to conduct rituals. People avoided walking around at night, and many felt uneasy just being there. Xu Guoli had lived a double life, appearing as a loving husband while hiding something horrifying. His actions left lasting scars on his community and Lai's family. Even after the case was closed, the haunting details stayed with everyone who followed the story. What started as a missing person report turned into one of the most chilling cases China had ever seen.
The coastal waters off Santa Barbara, California, had always been a playground for thrill seekers. But on September 1st, 2025, those pristine waves nearly became a graveyard. The area, known for its consistent offshore winds and relatively calm morning conditions, had become increasingly popular among extreme sports enthusiasts. Local marine biologists had noted an uptick in seal populations along the nearby Channel Islands, which inevitably drew larger predators closer to shore during the late summer months. Ethan Walker, a 29-year-old aerospace engineer from San Diego, had been perfecting his jetpack techniques for nearly 3 years. His companions that morning were equally experienced. Lila Morgan, a 26-year-old stunt coordinator from Los Angeles, and Tyler Chen, a 31-year-old former Navy pilot turned extreme sports instructor. The trio had planned their session for dawn, when tourist boat traffic remained minimal, and wind conditions provided optimal stability for their aerial maneuvers. Walker had invested considerable time researching the perfect location for their most ambitious routine yet. The plan involved synchronized barrel rolls, water-skimming passes, and formation flying that would push their equipment to its limits. Each rider carried military-grade jetpacks capable of sustained flight for up to 12 minutes, with emergency flotation systems and GPS tracking devices as safety measures. The morning began flawlessly. Morgan executed a series of tight spirals approximately 15 feet above the water's surface, her jetpack's exhaust creating small steam clouds as it interacted with the cool ocean air. Chen demonstrated his signature move, diving to within inches of the waves before pulling up sharply in a vertical climb. Walker focused on maintaining formation while recording their stunts with a helmet-mounted camera system. 23 minutes into their session, Chen attempted his most challenging maneuver, a double-spin dive that would take him directly through the jetpack wash of his companions. He initiated the rotation at 40 feet altitude, building momentum as he descended. The mathematical precision required for such a stunt left little margin for error, and Chen had practiced the timing countless times in simulators. However, a minor turbulence pocket created by Walker's jetpack exhaust disrupted Chen's stabilization system mid-spin. His gyroscope readings fluctuated wildly as he fought to regain control, but the centrifugal force had already committed him to the descent trajectory. Chen managed to activate his emergency stabilizers, but the correction came too late. He struck the water's surface at approximately 30 miles per hour. His jetpack's thrust immediately cut by the impact sensors. The saltwater was surprisingly cold for early September, and Chen found himself momentarily disoriented as his life vest automatically inflated. His jetpack, now waterlogged and useless, dragged him down briefly before the emergency release mechanism activated. He surfaced sputtering approximately 60 yards from shore, while Walker and Morgan circled overhead, shouting instructions about swimming toward the beach. What none of them noticed was the massive shadow gliding through the deeper water beyond the kelp beds. The great white shark measured approximately 15 feet in length and weighed close to 3,000 pounds. It had been tracking a wounded sea lion for the better part of an hour when the sudden disturbance above caught its attention. The predator's electroreceptors detected Chen's elevated heart rate and the unusual electromagnetic signatures from the waterlogged jetpack equipment. Chen had managed to swim roughly 20 yards toward shore when he felt something brush against his legs. Initially dismissing it as kelp, he continued his steady stroke pattern while calling out to his companions that he was uninjured. Walker and Morgan had descended to approximately 10 feet above the water, preparing to attempt a rescue maneuver they had practiced, but never executed in real conditions. The shark struck with devastating speed and precision. Chen's world exploded into chaos as massive jaws clamped around both his legs just above the knees. The initial bite pressure, estimated later at over 4,000 pounds per square inch, crushed through his wetsuit material and into flesh. The shark's serrated teeth, each measuring up to 3 inches in length, penetrated deep tissue as the predator began its characteristic thrashing motion designed to disorient and weaken prey. Walker and Morgan watched in horror as their friend disappeared beneath a churning mass of white water and blood. Morgan immediately descended to water level, using her jetpack's downward thrust to create maximum splash and noise. Walker circled frantically, shouting tactical instructions while trying to position himself for a potential rescue attempt. Underwater, Chen fought against primal terror as the shark dragged him deeper. The predator's dead black eyes, each the size of a tennis ball, stared at him with ancient hunger. Chen managed to grab the shark's snout with both hands, pushing upward while kicking with his injured legs. The pain was extraordinary, but adrenaline provided temporary strength. Walker made a split-second decision that would later be called either incredibly brave or completely reckless. He shut down his jetpack and dropped directly into the water beside the attack site, carrying the pack's metal stabilizer bar as an improvised weapon. The bar, designed to prevent equipment damage during hard landings, measured 3 feet in length and weighed 12 pounds. As Chen and the shark breached the surface in a violent spray of foam and blood, Walker drove the stabilizer bar directly into the predator's gill slits. The shark's grip loosened momentarily, allowing Chen to break free and swim desperately toward Morgan, who had positioned herself as close to the water as her hovering jetpack would allow. The great white circled once, its primitive brain processing this unusual encounter. Walker continued striking at the water with his improvised weapon while Morgan created maximum surface disturbance with her jetpack's thrust. After what felt like hours but lasted perhaps 90 seconds, the shark's dorsal fin disappeared into deeper water. Coast Guard rescue boats, alerted by the GPS emergency signals from their equipment, arrived within 12 minutes. Chen was airlifted to a trauma center with severe lacerations to both legs, substantial blood loss, and symptoms of shock. Walker suffered minor cuts from debris, while Morgan escaped physically unharmed but deeply traumatized. Marine biologists later confirmed that great white shark activity had increased dramatically along the California coast that week, with multiple sightings reported from Monterey to San Diego. Experts theorized that unusual water temperatures and abundant prey had drawn larger predators closer to shore than typically observed. All 3 riders survived the encounter, though Chen required extensive reconstructive surgery and months of rehabilitation. The incident prompted new safety protocols for extreme water sports, including mandatory shark spotting procedures and emergency response training. Walker and Morgan never flew together again, each pursuing safer hobbies far from the ocean's unpredictable dangers. The remote coral formations off the coast of Palawan, Philippines, had remained largely unexplored by commercial diving operations as of September 2024. These pristine reefs, located nearly 40 kilometers from the nearest fishing village, harbored some of the most diverse marine ecosystems in Southeast Asia. The area's isolation meant that large predators still patrolled these waters with minimal human interference, creating an environment where ancient hunting patterns remained undisturbed. Ramon del Rosario, a 33-year-old spearfishing guide from Manila, had built his reputation on accessing fishing grounds that other guides considered too remote or dangerous. His clients paid premium rates for the opportunity to hunt in waters where massive groupers and other trophy fish remained abundant. Del Rosario's expertise in nighttime spearfishing set him apart from conventional guides, as he understood that certain species became more accessible under the cover of darkness. The expedition that brought Del Rosario to these waters involved a wealthy businessman seeking to land a record-sized grouper. The client had specifically requested a midnight dive, having researched reports that suggested the largest specimens emerged from deep reef caves only during nighttime hours. Del Rosario had agreed to the unusual timing, despite his general preference for dawn hunting sessions. Del Rosario descended alone into the inky water at approximately 11:47 p.m., carrying only a high-powered dive light, his custom spear gun, and 40 minutes of air supply. His strategy involved locating the deep reef caves where large groupers typically sheltered, then using his light to disorient the fish long enough to achieve a clean kill shot. The technique required exceptional diving skills and intimate knowledge of fish behavior patterns. The water temperature at 30 feet depth measured 28 degrees Celsius, with virtually no current and unlimited visibility within his light beam's range. Del Rosario had identified a promising cave formation during his afternoon reconnaissance dive, noting signs of large fish activity, including disturbed sediment and territorial markings on the coral surfaces. 43 minutes into his dive, Del Rosario located his target. A massive Queensland grouper, weighing an estimated 120 pounds, hovered motionless near the cave entrance. The fish appeared unaware of his presence as he maneuvered into position for the killing shot. Del Rosario steadied his breathing and aligned his spear gun's sight with the grouper's vital area behind the gills. The spear struck perfectly, penetrating deep into the fish's body cavity. The wounded grouper immediately began its death throes, thrashing violently while blood dispersed through the water column. Del Rosario secured his catch line and began the process of subduing the massive fish, a procedure that typically required several minutes of careful handling to prevent equipment damage or injury. The hammerhead shark detected the disturbance from approximately 200 meters away. The 10-foot predator had been patrolling the reef's outer edge when Del Rosario's dive light and the grouper's death struggle triggered its hunting instincts. Hammerheads possessed exceptional sensory capabilities in low-light conditions, and the combination of electromagnetic signatures from the dive equipment and chemical traces from the wounded fish created an irresistible stimulus. Del Rosario was focused entirely on securing his catch when the shark's distinctive silhouette entered his light beam. The hammerhead's bizarre head structure, with eyes positioned at the extreme ends of its flattened skull, gave it an almost alien appearance in the artificial illumination. The predator approached with the confident movements of an apex hunter that had encountered no significant threats in these waters. The attack occurred without warning as Del Rosario attempted to swim toward the surface with his prize. The hammerhead struck from his blind spot, its jaws clamping around his shoulder and the upper portion of his diving vest. The impact knocked Del Rosario sideways into the coral formation, his dive light spinning wildly and creating disorienting flashes of illumination. The shark's teeth, though smaller than those of other species, proved devastatingly effective at penetrating diving equipment. Del Rosario felt his vest's inflation system rupture as the hammerhead shook him violently from side to side. His spear gun was torn from his grasp along with the prize grouper that had attracted the predator initially. Del Rosario fought back using the only weapons available, his dive knife and his remaining physical strength. He managed to strike the shark multiple times across its sensitive snout area, while simultaneously kicking against the coral to prevent being dragged into deeper water. The hammerhead's grip loosened momentarily, allowing Del Rosario to break free from its jaws. However, the predator's hunting instincts remained fully engaged. The hammerhead circled repeatedly in the narrow confines of the reef formation, its movements becoming increasingly agitated as it attempted to relocate its escaped prey. Del Rosario's dive light, still functioning despite the attack, created moving shadows that seemed to confuse the shark's navigation systems. After nearly 3 minutes of cat-and-mouse maneuvering through the coral maze, the hammerhead finally retreated into the open water beyond the reef. Del Rosario surfaced immediately, his emergency whistle creating piercing signals that carried across the calm night air. His support boat crew, who had been monitoring his dive schedule, reached his position within 8 minutes. Del Rosario survived the encounter with severe lacerations to his shoulder and upper arm, requiring immediate evacuation to a hospital in Puerto Princesa. Local authorities later confirmed multiple hammerhead sightings in the area throughout September 2019, suggesting that seasonal feeding patterns had drawn these normally deep-water predators into shallower reef environments. The incident effectively ended Del Rosario's career as a spearfishing guide, though he recovered fully from his injuries. He subsequently established a diving safety training program emphasizing the unique risks associated with nighttime spearfishing in predator-rich waters. The attack remains one of the few documented hammerhead encounters with recreational divers in Philippine waters. Coastal waters surrounding British Columbia had witnessed unusual orca behavior throughout the summer of 2025, with marine biologists documenting increasingly bold interactions between killer whales and recreational watercraft. These incidents, occurring primarily in the Strait of Georgia and surrounding channels, represented a significant departure from the typically predictable behavior patterns that had characterized orca populations for decades. Local authorities had issued advisories warning boaters and swimmers to maintain increased vigilance when encountering whale pods. Liam O'Connor, a 32-year-old marine photographer from Vancouver, had dedicated his career to documenting orca behavior in their natural habitat. His portfolio included some of the most striking underwater images of killer whales ever captured in Pacific Northwest waters. O'Connor's technique involved patient observation from small watercraft, allowing him to predict pod movements and position himself for optimal photographic opportunities without disrupting the animal's natural behaviors. The expedition that brought O'Connor to these waters on July 14th involved a collaborative project with marine biologists studying orca communication patterns. His companions included research assistant Sarah Mackenzie and graduate student Thomas Hartwell, both experienced in whale observation protocols. Their small research vessel carried hydrophone equipment for recording whale vocalizations, along with standard safety gear for extended periods on the water. O'Connor had identified a pod of 7 orcas moving slowly through the channel, including 2 large males whose distinctive dorsal fins measured over 6 feet in height. The pod's relaxed swimming pattern and frequent surface breathing suggested they were engaged in social behavior rather than active hunting, creating ideal conditions for close observation and photography. Weather conditions remained calm with excellent underwater visibility extending beyond 20 meters. The team had maintained their observation position for approximately 2 hours when O'Connor decided to enter the water for underwater photography. His wetsuit provided adequate thermal protection for the 15-degree water temperature, while his underwater camera housing would allow him to document the pod's behavior from below the surface. Mackenzie and Hartwell remained aboard the research vessel, monitoring both O'Connor's position and the pod's movements through binoculars. O'Connor entered the water roughly 50 meters from the pod's estimated position, using snorkel gear to maintain surface breathing while positioning himself for underwater shots. The orcas appeared completely indifferent to his presence initially, continuing their social interactions without alteration to their swimming patterns. O'Connor began photographing the pod from a respectful distance, using his camera's telephoto capabilities to avoid approaching too closely. The largest male orca, measuring approximately 26 feet in length and weighing an estimated 8 tons, began exhibiting curious behavior toward O'Connor after 12 minutes of observation. The massive predator approached slowly, its intelligent eyes clearly focused on the human floating at the surface. O'Connor maintained his position while documenting this unprecedented interaction, believing the encounter represented valuable scientific data. The orca's initial contact involved a gentle nudge with its distinctive, rounded snout, a behavior that marine biologists classify as investigative rather than aggressive. O'Connor reported later that the animal's skin felt surprisingly smooth and warm despite the cold water temperature. The killer whale circled once before approaching for a second, more forceful investigation that knocked O'Connor several meters sideways. The situation escalated dramatically when the orca suddenly clamped its massive jaws around O'Connor's leg just above the knee. The predator's teeth, each measuring over 3 inches in length, punctured through the wetsuit material and into flesh. O'Connor immediately understood that he was experiencing the first documented orca attack on a human in British Columbia waters, though he later admitted that his scientific training prevented panic during the initial moments. The orca's bite pressure, though potentially capable of severing limbs, remained relatively controlled compared to the animal's full capabilities. Marine biologists theorized that the killer whale was treating O'Connor as an object of curiosity rather than prey, though the distinction provided little comfort during the attack itself. O'Connor struck the orca's snout repeatedly, while kicking with his free leg in an attempt to escape. Mackenzie and Hartwell witnessed the attack from their research vessel and immediately began implementing emergency protocols. Mackenzie activated their marine radio, while Hartwell prepared rescue equipment and started the engine for a rapid approach to O'Connor's position. Both observers noted that the other pod members remained at a distance, suggesting the attack represented individual behavior rather than coordinated hunting. The orca released its grip after approximately 45 seconds, during which time O'Connor sustained deep lacerations and significant tissue damage. The predator retreated to rejoin its pod, which resumed normal swimming patterns as if the incident had never occurred. O'Connor swam desperately toward the research vessel while Mackenzie and Hartwell coordinated his rescue from the water. Emergency medical treatment began immediately aboard the research vessel, with Mackenzie applying pressure bandages to control bleeding while Hartwell radioed for Coast Guard assistance. O'Connor remained conscious throughout the rescue, providing detailed observations about the attack that would later prove valuable to marine behaviorists studying the incident. Canadian Coast Guard vessels reached their position within 23 minutes, transferring O'Connor to a hospital for emergency surgery. His injuries required extensive reconstruction of damaged muscle tissue and several months of rehabilitation, though he retained full use of his leg. The attack left distinctive tooth marks that marine biologists used to identify the specific individual responsible. Subsequent investigation revealed that the attacking orca belonged to a transient pod known for unusual behavior patterns, including documented interactions with recreational boats and fishing vessels. Marine authorities implemented temporary restrictions on recreational activities in areas where this particular pod had been sighted, though the restrictions proved controversial among whale-watching operators. O'Connor eventually returned to marine photography, though he discontinued underwater work involving large marine mammals. His detailed account of the attack provided researchers with unprecedented insight into orca behavior during human interactions. The incident highlighted the need for enhanced safety protocols when working in close proximity to killer whale populations, particularly given the increasing frequency of unusual encounters throughout the Pacific Northwest.
On Halloween night in 1992, millions of people across the UK tuned in to watch a special BBC program called Ghost Watch. It was promoted as a live paranormal investigation, following a family in Northolt, London, who claimed their home was haunted. The show was hosted by well-known TV personalities, giving it an air of authenticity. However, what viewers didn't realize was that Ghost Watch was entirely scripted, a fictional drama designed to look like a real broadcast. What started as entertainment quickly turned into a national controversy. The program featured broadcaster Michael Parkinson in the studio, while TV presenter Sarah Green led the on-site investigation. She visited the home of the Early family, Pamela and her 2 daughters, who had reported hearing unexplained banging, tapping, and scratching in their house. At first, Pamela thought it was a plumbing issue, but as objects began moving on their own and her children developed strange scratches, she became convinced that something more sinister was happening. The family believed a spirit, which they called Pipes because of the banging noises, was behind the disturbances. As the show continued, shadowy figures were seen in the background, and it was suggested that Pipes was the ghost of a man named Raymond Tunstall, a former resident with a troubled past. The program built tension through unsettling moments, making it feel terrifyingly real. The realistic filming style only added to the effect. The shaky camera work, unexpected technical difficulties, and chaotic atmosphere convinced many that they were witnessing a real paranormal event. The fear escalated when Sarah Green entered a cupboard under the stairs and suddenly vanished, seemingly pulled in by an unseen force. Meanwhile, in the studio, lights flickered, equipment malfunctioned, and Michael Parkinson appeared to be in a trance, speaking in a disturbing tone. Then, without warning, the screen cut to a standard BBC News broadcast, leaving viewers in shock. Immediately after the show ended, panic spread across the country. The BBC received over 20,000 calls that night from terrified viewers, many of whom believed they had just watched a real supernatural event unfold. Parents reported that their children were deeply disturbed, with some refusing to sleep alone. Some even claimed to have experienced strange occurrences in their own homes after watching the program. The backlash was intense. Although Ghostwatch had been labeled as a drama in TV guides, many viewers had missed the disclaimer and felt misled. Complaints poured in, accusing the BBC of causing unnecessary fear. Some women reportedly went into labor due to the shock, and many children were left frightened long after the broadcast. Due to the controversy, the BBC decided never to air Ghostwatch again. It was effectively banned from television, remaining locked away for years. However, the most tragic consequence of the program was its effect on 18-year-old Martin Denham. Martin, who had learning difficulties, was deeply affected by Ghostwatch. His parents, April and Percy Denham, said he became increasingly distressed after watching the show, convinced that the events on TV were happening in his own home. 5 days later, he passed away, leaving behind a note that suggested he believed he would become a ghost himself. His devastated parents felt that Ghostwatch played a role in his distress and called for an investigation into the BBC's responsibility. Following Martin's passing, the Broadcasting Standards Commission launched a review. The commission concluded that the BBC had created an atmosphere of fear without making it clear enough that the program was fictional. While the network was criticized for not warning the public properly, no legal action was taken. The show's creator, Stephen Volk, later stated that he never intended for Ghostwatch to cause harm. He had envisioned it as an immersive ghost story similar to the War of the Worlds radio broadcast, which also sparked panic when it aired in 1938. However, he was taken aback by the extreme reactions and the real-life consequences. The controversy damaged the public's trust in the BBC, and Volk understood why many felt deceived. Despite its troubled history, Ghostwatch later gained a cult following. Its unique format influenced found-footage horror films like The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. However, its legacy remains overshadowed by the distress it caused and the tragedy linked to it. To this day, Ghostwatch is remembered as one of the most unsettling moments in television history. What was meant to be a spooky Halloween special ended up causing fear and confusion across the nation. For some, it was an unforgettable horror experience. For others, it was a painful reminder of how easily fiction can blur with reality. It was June 20th, 1991, in Buttsfield County, Durham, England. Harry Collinson, a 46-year-old planning officer, arrived at a property set for demolition. The bungalow had been built illegally by landowner Albert Dryden, who had refused to comply with planning laws. After years of disputes, the local council decided to take action. Collinson was accompanied by a solicitor, council workers, and a demolition crew. Journalists and camera operators were also present to document the event. Officials expected some resistance from Dryden, but no one was prepared for what happened next. Around 9 a.m., Dryden emerged from his property holding a .455 Webley Mark VI revolver. Without hesitation, he aimed at Collinson and fired. Chaos erupted as Collinson collapsed. Some people ran for safety while others ducked behind trees and vehicles. But Dryden wasn't finished. He climbed over the fence, approached the wounded Collinson, and fired twice more. The horrifying scene was broadcast live on BBC's Look North, shocking the nation. During the attack, BBC reporter Tony Belmont was hit in the arm, and police constable Stephen Campbell was wounded in the leg. Dryden also shot at a police vehicle, forcing officers to retreat. When he ran out of bullets, he withdrew to his property, warning police that he had explosives. He had illegally obtained grenades and a 20mm cannon, making the standoff even more dangerous. Armed officers quickly arrived. Knowing Dryden's history and love of weapons, they were prepared for trouble. Negotiators tried to calm him, offering to install a field telephone for communication. When Dryden stepped out of his caravan to watch them, officers noticed his gun holster was empty. Seizing the opportunity, Sergeant John Taylor tackled him to the ground, and police moved in to make the arrest. The attack was one of the most shocking crimes ever witnessed live on British television. Harry Collinson's death devastated his family, and the footage of the incident haunted the public for years. Albert Dryden was born in 1940 in Consett, England, into a working-class family. His father worked at the Consett Iron Company, while his mother was deeply involved with the Salvation Army. Dryden was a private person, spending much of his time alone, obsessed with weapons. At just 11 years old, he obtained his first firearm, the same type of revolver he later used in the attack. Though he never had a firearms license, he accumulated an illegal collection of weapons over the years. Dryden built his bungalow in Buttsfield as a personal retreat, growing vegetables and raising livestock. He wanted to live independently, but the council ruled the construction illegal. Dryden argued that the building was hidden in a hollow and shouldn't require permission, but officials disagreed. Years of legal battles led to the final demolition order. By the time the crew arrived that day, Dryden's anger had reached its breaking point. His long fight with the council ended in a violent act that shocked the country. Following his arrest, Dryden was charged with taking Harry Collinson's life, attempting to harm council solicitor Michael Dunstan, and injuring P.C. Campbell and Tony Belmont. In court, he claimed he wasn't in a stable mental state, but the jury didn't believe him. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 2 life terms, along with additional prison time for the injuries he caused. Even behind bars, Dryden refused to take responsibility. He insisted he was the victim of a conspiracy and spread false claims, including accusations about Collinson's ties to law enforcement, none of which were ever proven. After serving 26 years, Dryden was released in 2017 due to poor health. A severe stroke left him unable to speak, and he was placed in a care home. His release was met with mixed reactions. For Harry Collinson's older brother Roy, there was no sympathy. Over the years, Dryden had sent Roy letters filled with bizarre claims but never expressed remorse. In September 2018, at the age of 78, Dryden passed away. His death brought no comfort to Collinson's family, only the end of a painful chapter. Roy made it clear that he felt nothing for Dryden's passing. The tragic events of June 20th, 1991 remain one of the most disturbing moments in British history. A years-long dispute over an illegal building escalated into a shocking crime, forever remembered by those who saw it unfold on live television. It was December 11th, 2022 in Solihull, West Midlands, when a devastating incident shook the community. 4 young boys, ages 6, 8, 10, and 11, were playing on the frozen surface of Babbs Mill Lake, a popular spot in Kingshurst. Suddenly the ice gave way and they fell into the freezing water. Rescue teams arrived quickly, doing everything they could to save them. Firefighters, police officers, and paramedics worked in extreme conditions, with one officer even trying to break the ice with his bare hands. Unfortunately, despite all efforts, 3 of the boys, aged 8, 10, and 11, did not survive. The youngest, a 6-year-old, was the only one who made it out alive. The next day, BBC presenter Joanna Gosling reported the tragic news during a live broadcast. With over 20 years of experience, she had covered many difficult stories, but this one was different. As she spoke, her voice broke. "I have some really sad news to bring you," she said, struggling to hold back tears. "We are hearing that 3 boys, aged 10, 11, and 8, have died." She paused, clearly shaken. "I am so sorry. This is terrible news." Her emotional reaction was felt by viewers across the country. Journalists are trained to stay composed, but some stories are too painful to report without showing emotion. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, pulling the boys from the freezing water. They were rushed to Birmingham Children's Hospital and Heartlands Hospital in critical condition. Doctors did all they could, but the damage from the freezing temperatures was severe. Rescuers were deeply affected by the tragedy. The officer who tried to break the ice suffered mild hypothermia but later recovered. The emotional toll, however, was far greater. As news spread, grief took hold of the community. A memorial near the lake grew as people left flowers, stuffed animals, and messages for the boys and their families. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers came together to mourn. Members of emergency services, local politicians, and sports clubs, including Marston Green FC, also paid their respects. Superintendent Richard Harris of West Midlands Police spoke about the devastating loss. "The families are absolutely heartbroken, and we are doing everything we can to support them," he said. "With Christmas so close, it makes this even harder to bear." The tragedy also led to warnings from authorities about the dangers of frozen lakes. Richard Stanton, a commander from the West Midlands Fire Service, urged parents to talk to their children about the risks. "Frozen lakes, ponds, and reservoirs may look safe, but they can be deadly," he said. Joanna Gosling's reaction to the heartbreaking news spread widely. As a mother herself, the story deeply affected her, and her emotions reflected the grief felt across the country. Many viewers reached out to offer support, understanding how difficult it must have been to deliver such tragic news on live television. Later, she responded on social media, thanking people for their kindness. "I deeply appreciate the messages of support. It was shocking news, and my heart goes out to the families," she wrote. Earlier that year, she had also shown emotion while reporting on another major story, the return of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe to the UK after years of detention in Iran. But the loss of 3 young children in Solihull felt even more personal. It was a reminder that behind every journalist is a human being who carries the weight of the stories they report. The deaths of the 3 boys left a lasting scar on their families, the rescuers, and the entire community. The small memorial at Babbs Mill Lake stood as a heartbreaking tribute to their young lives, gone too soon. For those left behind, no words could ease the pain. The rescue teams did all they could, but nothing could bring the boys back. Their families would carry this grief forever. What started as a simple day of play ended in unimaginable loss. A tragedy that no one saw coming changed the lives of so many, leaving behind a community in mourning. It was January 16, 2009, when an unexpected moment on live television left viewers across the world in stunned silence. Israeli journalist Shlomi Eldar was preparing to interview Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni about the war in Gaza when he received a call that would change the course of the broadcast and deeply move everyone watching. The call came from Dr. Izzeldin Abuelaish, a Palestinian doctor who had worked in Israeli hospitals for years. Known for his commitment to peace, Abuelaish never let the region's ongoing conflict cloud his belief in coexistence. But this time, he wasn't calling to talk about hope or his work. His voice trembled as he shared the devastating news that would forever change his life. Izzeldin's anguish poured through the phone as Eldar listened in disbelief. His home in Gaza had been struck in an airstrike, and the devastating news followed. 3 of Izzeldin's daughters and his niece had been killed instantly. Shaken by the raw grief in Izzeldin's voice, Eldar made a split-second decision to put the call on speaker. The entire nation was now able to hear the depth of his pain. In the background, the sounds of his surviving children crying filled the airwaves, adding to the tragedy unfolding. Izzeldin could barely hold it together, his words filled with sorrow as he recalled the futile attempt to save them. He spoke of his desperate efforts and the unbearable loss, questioning the cruelty of the situation. The moment was unlike anything seen before on television. A father, a doctor, a man who had dedicated his life to healing, was now experiencing unimaginable loss, live on air. His cries weren't just those of a grieving parent, they were a plea for an end to the violence. As the world watched, Abuelaish begged for help. Some of his family members were still alive, but with roads blocked and medical aid unable to reach them, their chances of survival grew slimmer by the second. He pleaded with Eldar, desperate for a way to get the injured to safety. The broadcast was raw and unscripted, a stark glimpse into the human cost of war. Eldar, deeply moved, turned to the Israeli Defense Forces, urging anyone listening to help. Viewers across Israel, many of whom had felt detached from the suffering in Gaza, suddenly saw the conflict in a different light. This wasn't just about politics or military operations. These were families, children, and human lives being torn apart. Eldar later reflected on the profound impact of that moment. It was the first time many Israelis were confronted with the faces of those directly affected by the tragedy, and it became impossible for them to ignore the reality of the situation any longer. The tragedy of Abuelaish's daughters, Besson, Meyer, and Aya, left a lasting scar. Besson had been studying business and was actively involved in peace efforts. Meyer dreamed of becoming a doctor, following in her father's footsteps. Aya, the youngest, loved poetry and had a bright future ahead. Their lives were taken in an instant, leaving their father with nothing but memories and an unbearable loss. Despite his pain, Abuelaish refused to let grief turn into hatred. Instead, he used his voice to call for peace. In the years that followed, he wrote a memoir titled, "I Shall Not Hate," a Gaza doctor's journey on the road to peace and human dignity, where he shared his story and his hope for a future where Palestinians and Israelis could live together without fear. His message resonated worldwide, making him a symbol of resilience. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 5 times, and despite the heartache he carried, he continued to push forward, speaking about the need for understanding and coexistence. That phone call on January 16, 2009, became a moment in history, an unfiltered, heartbreaking glimpse into the real cost of conflict. It wasn't just another news report. It was a father's desperate cry, a wake-up call to everyone watching. And though it couldn't bring back his daughters, it sparked conversations about peace, compassion, and the shared humanity that exists beyond the lines of war. It was October 13, 2008, in Santo André, São Paulo, Brazil. 15-year-old Eloa Cristina Pimentel was at home working on a school project with her friend, Nayara Rodrigues da Silva, and two male classmates. But that afternoon, their quiet study session took a dark turn. Eloa's 22-year-old ex-boyfriend, Lindenberg Fernandez Alves, suddenly entered the apartment with a firearm. He let the two boys leave but kept Eloa and Nayara inside. This started a hostage situation that lasted 5 days and was broadcast across Brazil. It ended in tragedy and raised serious concerns about how the police and media handled it. Eloa and Lindenberg had been in a relationship for about 2 years. When she ended it, he had a hard time accepting it. Reports later said he had become obsessed with her. That day, he acted on his emotions and refused to leave. Police quickly responded. The Special Tactical Actions Group, known as GATE, took over and began negotiating, hoping to resolve the situation peacefully. The next evening, Nayara was released unharmed, but 2 days later, on October 15th, police made a surprising move. They asked Nayara to go back into the apartment, saying her presence might help calm Lindenberg and support the talks. Nayara, only 15 years old, agreed to return, a decision that many later called dangerous and unnecessary. As the situation dragged on, media attention exploded. News outlets gave live updates all day and night. The case became a national obsession. Things went even further when Rita TV. Journalist Sonia Abreu called Lindenberg live on air while he was still inside with the girls. She spoke with both him and Eloa. The call was broadcast to the whole country. Legal experts later said the call interfered with the police operation. A civil case was filed against Abreu, accusing her of putting lives at risk. Other news networks, like Rita Record and Read Globo, were also criticized for their non-stop coverage, which some experts said made the situation worse. By October 17th, the standoff had gone on for over 100 hours. Police said they heard gunshots and decided to break in. GATE, along with military police shock troops, forced their way inside. Lindenberg resisted. During the struggle, he used the firearm. Nayara was injured in the face, but managed to leave the apartment alive. Eloa was hit twice, once in the head and once in the lower body. Cameras were rolling as she was carried out unconscious. She was taken to a hospital but didn't survive. On October 18th, doctors declared her brain dead. At 11:30 p.m., she was removed from life support. Her organs were later donated and saved 7 lives. Around 10,000 people attended Eloa's funeral. Nayara survived and went through a long recovery. In 2018, she was awarded 150,000 Brazilian real in damages after the court found the state responsible for what she had gone through. Lindenberg was arrested right after the rescue. Later, leaked videos showed police stepping on his neck and questioning him while he was undressed and bruised. This raised debate about how he was treated in custody. He went to trial in 2012 and was found guilty of 12 charges, including unlawful confinement and illegal firearm possession. He was sentenced to 98 years and 10 months, though the law only allowed a maximum of 30 years at that time. That limit later increased, and in 2013 his sentence was adjusted to 39 years and 3 months. Experts criticized the way the whole operation was handled, from delays in police action to the risky decision of sending Nayara back inside. The media's behavior was also condemned. Investigations were launched into whether the coverage made the situation worse. Then, another twist came to light. Eloa's father, Everaldo Pereira dos Santos, had changed his name and was wanted for serious crimes. He disappeared during the hostage crisis and was found and arrested in 2009. To this day, Eloa's story remains one of Brazil's most disturbing and tragic cases. It was sometime in 2003 during an episode of Conselho de Mujer, a Mexican daytime talk show aimed at women. The program typically covered topics like lifestyle, health, and beauty, and occasionally featured live animals for educational segments. On this particular day, 2 animal handlers from a local zoo were invited to introduce a young lion cub. The plan was to talk about how the animal was raised in captivity. The handlers were seated with the lion between them. Nearby, a mother sat holding her young daughter, who was calmly enjoying a lollipop while looking around the studio. Everything seemed fine. Despite being a cub, the lion was already large and powerful. It sat on a leash, appearing relaxed. The handlers and show hosts were calm. The mother and her daughter showed no sign of fear. But then, something unexpected happened. The little girl let out a soft whimper. The high-pitched sound caught the lion's attention. It stood up and stared directly at her. The handlers quickly tried to get it to settle down. It obeyed, for a moment. Then the child began to cry louder. Without warning, the lion lunged. It grabbed the girl's legs with its front paws and bit down. The studio filled with screams. The mother stood up and tried to pull her daughter close, but the lion didn't let go. It pulled back, its grip unshaken. The handlers rushed in, one trying to pry open the lion's mouth, the other holding the animal's body. The child kept screaming as her mother clutched her tightly. The trainers, speaking rapidly in Spanish, repeated instructions like, "Stay calm" and "Don't move," as they tried to control the situation. It took several moments before they could separate the animal from the child. One handler held the lion's head while the other pulled its body back. Eventually, they managed to get the lion to release its grip. The girl was finally freed, crying and in shock. Her mother immediately checked her for injuries. What happened next left many viewers confused. The mother suddenly laughed. Some believed it was a reaction to the intense stress, a confused emotional response after what had just happened. Others were unsettled by how casual everyone on set seemed afterward. One of the handlers leaned in to hug both the mother and the child. The lion, still present, was even shown on camera again, while the child's cries continued in the background. The show awkwardly continued, with forced laughter and uneasy smiles. Years later, when the footage was uploaded to YouTube by Uniquely News in 2016, the incident caught wider attention. Viewers began to notice unsettling details. Before the lion lunged, it had been staring at the child for several moments. At one point, the camera zoomed in on its face, as if capturing something that was about to unfold. There had been no visible safety measures in place, no barrier between the lion and the child, no effort to keep some distance. Viewers and experts alike criticized the poor decision-making. Allowing a wild animal to be that close to a child, especially on a live set, was seen as incredibly risky. Though the child wasn't seriously injured, specialists warned about the long-term emotional effects of such an event. Being harmed by a wild animal, especially in a public setting, can leave a deep psychological impact. In the final moments of the video, after the lion was taken off camera, it could be seen staring intently at something behind the scenes. Another unsettling moment viewers wouldn't forget. The trainers later said the lion was simply playing, but experts in animal behavior disagreed. Even young wild animals have strong instincts, and in environments filled with bright lights, loud noises, and unfamiliar people, they can react unpredictably. Strangely, no legal action was ever taken. The lion remained with the handlers. The talk show continued airing until 2007. The identity of the child was never revealed, and she was never publicly seen again. She survived, but that incident left behind something unforgettable. It was 1992 in Manchester, England. Bobby Davro, a well-known comedian and TV personality, was filming the final scene of his show Public Enemy No. 1. Bobby was popular for his high-energy performances, and physical fitness was a big part of his life. His father, Bill Nankivell, was once an Olympic runner, and Bobby stayed active through his work. The scene they were filming was meant to be light-hearted. Bobby was locked into a wooden stocks prop, his head and hands sticking through the holes, while his fellow entertainers Keith Chegwin, Lionel Blair, and Jim Bowen threw tomatoes at him. But the prop wasn't secure, and Bobby had to balance himself on a box. The floor beneath him was hard concrete. Suddenly, he lost his balance. With his arms trapped, he couldn't stop himself from falling. He hit the ground face first. Keith Chegwin later said the sound of Bobby's head hitting the concrete was one of the worst he'd ever heard. Thankfully, Bobby managed to turn his head slightly mid-fall, which likely protected him from even worse injuries. Still, he cut his chin open and briefly lost consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors were surprised to find that he hadn't broken his nose or lost any teeth. However, he suffered a neck injury from the impact. He was diagnosed with whiplash and told to rest. Although filming had finished, the pain in his neck continued. It spread to other areas of his body. Bobby later visited an osteopath who used physical therapy to ease his symptoms. Recovery took about 6 weeks. He eventually regained movement, but the pain never fully went away. For a while, he couldn't even do basic exercises like sit-ups. Even years later, Bobby still deals with pain in his neck and upper back. Long car rides are difficult, and sometimes he experiences arm pain and headaches caused by nerve pressure. Unfortunately, this wasn't his only injury during a performance. In 2010, while taking part in Dancing on Ice, Bobby suffered another injury. He twisted his knee during a routine and ended up dislocating it. He took a short break, received treatment, and returned to the show. But just like before, the damage stayed with him. Today, he describes his knees as creaky and limits his workouts to short sessions. Still, Bobby says the hardest part of his life wasn't physical, it was emotional. In 2004, he separated from his wife, Trudy Jameson, the mother of his 3 children. It was a difficult time. A friend introduced him to Kevin Lay, a former serviceman and therapist, who used a method called neuro-linguistic programming. This approach helps people manage stress by shifting their thought patterns. Bobby was taught to mentally store his worries in a box and set them aside. Another method used was thought field therapy, which involves tapping parts of the body to reduce stress. Bobby was unsure if these techniques would work, but after 6 sessions he noticed a change. He says they helped him get through one of the lowest points in his life, and even now, he uses them when stress returns. Despite the physical and emotional setbacks, Bobby stayed in the spotlight. He continued performing in stage shows and made an appearance on Celebrity Big Brother. During the show, cameras captured him sleepwalking, something that only happens when he's sleeping in new places. Bobby says he's not bothered by it, and his family is used to it by now. He's spoken openly about that day in Manchester. He remembers walking into the hotel bar afterward, still dazed with a bruised face. The crew had waited quietly for news. Doctors told him just how close he came to a much more serious outcome. The fall was never aired, but the BBC now uses the clip for training purposes to show how fast accidents can happen, even in a controlled setting. Bobby never received compensation for what happened. At the time, it wasn't common to file injury claims like it is today. He believes things would have been handled differently if it had happened now. Today, Bobby continues to deal with the effects of that moment, the pain, the stress, and the pressure to keep going, but through all of it, he's managed to push forward, a little more careful than before, but still doing what he loves. It was December 14, 1982, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Maria Erinalda da Silva, a 23-year-old mother, arrived at the TVS studios carrying her 9-month-old daughter, Danubia. The baby was seriously ill, suffering from a rare eye condition that caused severe bleeding. Maria had been searching for medical help for months, visiting multiple hospitals, including Pedro Ernesto and Souza Aguiar, but was repeatedly turned away. Each time she was given excuses: no available beds, overcrowding, or uncertainty about how to treat the condition. With her daughter's health rapidly declining, Maria was desperate. She had heard that the television program O Povo na TV might be able to bring attention to their situation. The show was known for its dramatic, real-life reports covering crime, corruption, and personal struggles. Hosted by Wilton Franco, along with Wagner Montes, Sergio Mayandro, and Roberto Jefferson, it aimed to expose social injustices, but it also thrived on sensational stories that drew in large audiences. Maria hoped that by sharing her daughter's struggle, someone in authority would finally offer help. She arrived at the studio around 11 a.m., waiting anxiously for the live broadcast at 1 p.m. By the time she was called on stage at 1:40 p.m., Danubia's condition had worsened. Holding her weak, swollen baby, Maria pleaded for help. She described her exhausting search for treatment and the repeated refusals she faced. The hosts expressed sympathy, criticizing the healthcare system's failure. Meanwhile, the cameras zoomed in on Danubia's face, capturing every painful moment in real time. As Maria spoke, it became clear that her daughter's condition was deteriorating quickly. The baby remained in her mother's arms as the broadcast continued. Viewers at home watched as Danubia's small body became still. Just 40 minutes into the show, she had passed away on live television. The program did not stop. The hosts continued their discussion, speaking about healthcare failures and urging action. But for those watching, the reality was inescapable. They had just witnessed a child's final moments. It was a shocking moment in television history. Once the broadcast ended, an ambulance arrived to take Danubia's body to the Forensic Medical Institute. Maria, devastated, left the studio, still holding her child. Despite the tragedy, O Povo na TV continued its programming as usual. There was no pause, no acknowledgement of the gravity of what had just happened, only the continuation of a show built on dramatic storytelling. The response from the media was swift. On December 17th, Folha de São Paulo published a scathing editorial, condemning the program for turning a child's death into entertainment. The article described the broadcast as a disturbing example of television crossing ethical boundaries. It criticized how the show had exploited real suffering for higher viewership, rather than treating the situation with dignity. Public outrage spread across Brazil. Many were appalled that the program had aired such a heartbreaking moment without intervention or respect for the grieving mother. While O Povo na TV had long covered crime and injustice, this incident pushed the limits of what was acceptable on television. Despite the backlash, the show continued airing until 1984, when it was shut down due to another scandal involving one of its regular guests, Roberto Lengruber. Lengruber, who claimed to be a healer, performed so-called spiritual surgeries on live TV and gave medical advice without formal training. Concerns over his legitimacy had been growing, and in May 1983, both he and Wilton Franco were arrested for fraudulent medical practices. Lengruber had been offering unproven treatments to desperate people, leading to legal action against him and the show's producers. With its credibility shattered, O Povo na TV was permanently canceled in 1984. Even after the show ended, the memory of Danubia's final moments remained one of the most controversial and unsettling events in Brazilian television history. It wasn't just the tragedy itself that disturbed people, it was the way it was handled. The fact that a dying child had been filmed without any sensitivity or intervention deeply unsettled the public. In the aftermath, Maria Arenalda expressed gratitude toward Wilton Franco, stating that, unlike the hospitals that ignored her pleas, he had at least given her a chance to speak out. In her eyes, he had provided a platform for her daughter's suffering to be seen, even if it came under tragic circumstances. Years later, the events of that day remain a deeply unsettling chapter in Brazil's media history. The broadcast of Danubia's passing raised serious ethical concerns about sensational journalism and the responsibility of television programs when handling real-life tragedies. While O Povo na TV is long gone, its legacy remains tied to one of the most haunting moments ever aired on live television. On September 2, 2011, a routine evening in Chile took a tragic turn. Millions of viewers were watching the popular game show Calle Siete when their screens suddenly went dark. A serious news anchor appeared, delivering a shocking announcement that left the nation in disbelief. A Chilean Air Force Casa C-212 aircraft carrying 21 people had gone down near Robinson Crusoe Island in the Pacific Ocean. Among the passengers were beloved television host Felipe Camiroaga and journalist Roberto Bruce. The plane had been trying to land on the remote island when it lost communication with air traffic control. Shortly after, it disappeared from radar. At first, rescue teams searched for wreckage, but soon the devastating reality became clear. There were no survivors. For Chileans, this was a heartbreaking loss. Camiroaga was more than just a TV personality. He was a household name. As the host of Buenos Dias a Todos, he was a familiar face in millions of homes. Known for his humor, kindness, and charity work, he had earned the love and respect of the public. The idea that he could be gone was hard to accept. As news of the crash spread, the Chilean government confirmed the worst. Everyone on board had lost their lives. Details about the incident emerged. The aircraft, a twin-engine turboprop, had left Santiago as part of a relief mission. The team was traveling to Robinson Crusoe Island to document reconstruction efforts following the devastating 2010 earthquake. Alongside Camiroaga and Bruce were other TVN crew members and businessman Felipe Cubillos, who had been actively involved in rebuilding efforts. Weather conditions at the time were extreme. Strong winds and heavy rain made it difficult to land. The pilots attempted to approach the runway twice but had to abort due to poor visibility. On their third attempt, the aircraft vanished. Rescue operations began immediately, but the search was challenging. Fishermen and locals joined the efforts, holding on to hope. However, as time passed, it became clear there were no survivors. Back in Chile, TVN's newsroom was in shock. Colleagues struggled to continue their broadcasts as they processed the sudden loss of their friends. Across the country, the grief was overwhelming. People had watched these television figures for years, and now they were gone. One of the most chilling discoveries came later. Photographer Romina Irarazabal, one of the passengers, had taken pictures during the flight. A memory card from her camera, later found among the wreckage, contained 409 photos. 6 of these were from the final moments of the journey. The last 2 images captured the aircraft's interior as the plane descended. One showed the floor of the cabin, while the other revealed rising water against the window. Before the crash, she had the presence of mind to remove the memory card and secure it inside a water bottle. When divers recovered it in November 2011, it provided a haunting glimpse into the last moments on board. As the investigation continued, experts tried to determine what had caused the crash. Weather conditions were a major factor. Sudden gusts of wind combined with turbulence made it difficult for the pilots to maintain control. The aircraft was seen making a wide turn at low altitude before it vanished. Authorities concluded that the plane lost stability, leaving no time for the crew to recover before impact. The wreckage was found scattered across the ocean floor, confirming the devastating outcome. Grief spread across Chile. Crowds gathered outside TVN headquarters, lighting candles and leaving flowers in memory of the victims. Many couldn't believe that well-known figures like Camiroaga were truly gone. The tragedy left a lasting impact, as it felt like the country had lost a part of itself. In the months that followed, families and authorities worked to recover the bodies of the victims. Several were found, but the full impact of the loss had already set in. The crash had taken away not just individuals, but people who had shaped Chilean culture. The 2011 Casa C-212 crash remains one of Chile's most painful events. The loss of Felipe Camiroaga, Roberto Bruce, and the others left an unforgettable mark on the nation. Irarrázabal's photographs offered a final, heartbreaking glimpse into that day. Though years have passed, their memory lives on in the hearts of those who watched, knew, and loved them. June 12, 2000, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. A quiet afternoon in the neighborhood of Jardim Botânico took a terrifying turn when bus line 174 was hijacked. Around 2:20 p.m., a man named Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento boarded the bus intending to rob the passengers, but what began as a robbery quickly escalated into a live hostage crisis broadcast across the country. Nascimento's life was marked by hardship. Born into poverty, he experienced trauma early on. When he was just 8, he saw his mother lose her life in a violent incident. Soon after, he ended up living on the streets. In 1993, he survived the Candelaria massacre, where several homeless children were killed by police officers. Many of those victims were Nascimento's friends. That experience left a lasting impact on him. By 2000, Nascimento had already spent time in juvenile detention and prison. He struggled with untreated mental health problems and carried the weight of his past. He felt ignored by society and was growing increasingly unstable. That day, he boarded the bus armed with a .38 caliber revolver. He planned only to rob the passengers, but when someone signaled to a passing police car, things spiraled out of control. The police approached, unaware of what was going on. Nascimento responded by holding everyone at gunpoint. Police quickly surrounded the bus. Major TV networks arrived and began live coverage. It was one of the first times a hostage crisis had been shown in real time in Brazil. Millions watched, not knowing how it would end. Nascimento's initial demands were simple. He asked for a new driver because the original one had escaped and requested weapons. When denied, his behavior became more unpredictable. Around 6 p.m., he threatened to harm a hostage if his demands weren't met. He used several people as shields, taunting the police and the cameras. One chilling moment came when he pointed the gun at a woman named Janena Lopes Neves and fired near her head. The bullet didn't hit her. It was a bluff. But he told the other hostages to act like she had been shot, and they did, terrified of what he might do next. The footage shocked viewers across the country. By 6:50 p.m., Nascimento became more desperate. He exited the bus with a hostage, a teacher named Geisa Firmo Goncalves, using her as a shield. A tactical police officer rushed toward them with a submachine gun. Nascimento pulled Goncalves with him. The officer fired but missed and instead struck her in the face. Nascimento then fired at her 3 more times. She collapsed on the pavement. The bullet from the officer was later ruled an accident, but it didn't change the outcome. Geisa had lost her life in front of the entire country. Nascimento was quickly taken down by police and restrained in a vehicle, but shortly after he stopped breathing. The cause was listed as asphyxiation, though how it happened remains unclear. Some believe it was intentional. Others think it was due to the struggle and the pressure placed on him. The event left the nation in shock. It exposed the failures in Brazil's social system, how it had ignored people like Nascimento for years. Some saw him as a victim of that neglect. Others saw only the damage he caused. A documentary, Bus 174, directed by Jose Padilla, later examined the event and Nascimento's life. It featured interviews with hostages, family, and experts, offering a deeper look into how someone ends up on that path. Geisa was laid to rest in Fortaleza, with over 3,000 mourners in attendance. Nascimento was buried in a shallow grave with only his aunt present. Though it's been years, the hijacking of Bus 174 remains one of Brazil's darkest and most debated tragedies. The morning of February 28, 1997, in North Hollywood, Los Angeles. Most people were just starting their day when something extreme happened that would be remembered for decades. What began as a bank robbery quickly turned into one of the most intense shootouts in U.S. police history. By the end of it, over 2,000 bullets had been fired, and two men, Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu, would change the way law enforcement handled high-risk situations. At 9:17 a.m., Phillips, 26, and Matasareanu, 30, entered a Bank of America branch on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. They weren't ordinary robbers. They were armed with military-style rifles, wore head-to-toe homemade body armor, and had been planning the robbery for months. Everything was calculated: the weapons, the armor, the timing. Once inside, they ordered everyone to the floor. To make their message clear, they fired into the ceiling. They forced the tellers to open the vault, expecting to take around $750,000, but a recent change in the bank's cash delivery schedule meant they only walked away with $303,305. Frustrated, Matasareanu emptied a 75-round magazine into the vault, destroying the rest of the cash. As they prepared to leave, a routine police patrol spotted the two masked men. Realizing what was happening, the officers radioed for backup. Within minutes, the bank was surrounded by officers, many armed only with handguns and shotguns. The police tried to get them to surrender. Instead, the robbers responded with heavy gunfire. The police were at a huge disadvantage. Their weapons couldn't match the firepower or the body armor the suspects had. The robbers didn't just fire at the police. They fired at anything nearby. With bullets flying, officers struggled to keep control. Some rushed to local gun stores, grabbing AR-15 rifles just to hold their ground. SWAT officers were already training across town and headed to the scene, but they were still 18 minutes away. At 9:52 a.m., Phillips and Matasareanu split up. Phillips hid behind a truck while Matasareanu tried to escape in a hijacked car. Phillips had already been injured, and when his rifle jammed, he switched to a handgun, but he was quickly surrounded and hit several more times. Realizing he had no way out, Phillips ended his own life right there. Matasareanu was still trying to escape. He tried to take a civilian's vehicle, but the keys had been removed. Left exposed, he hid behind the car as police fired at him. Eventually, SWAT arrived and disabled him by aiming at his legs. He collapsed and was unable to move. Although he tried to give up, his injuries were too severe. Paramedics didn't reach him in time, and he passed away over an hour later. Incredibly, no officers or civilians died in the exchange, but 18 people were hurt, including 11 police officers and 7 bystanders. The level of danger, chaos, and sheer number of bullets made this one of the most violent encounters in modern police history. The aftermath led to major changes in law enforcement. Officers' standard weapons were no match for what they had faced, so the LAPD and other departments upgraded their equipment. The Pentagon even provided 600 M16 rifles to the LAPD. Police training also changed, placing more focus on how to handle high-powered threats. Officers were also given stronger body armor. A year after the shootout, 19 officers were awarded Medals of Valor and invited to meet President Bill Clinton. Even though the fight left many injured, it was seen as a major victory for law enforcement. The suspects had the advantage, but officers worked together, acted fast, and managed to protect the public. Phillips and Matasareanu came in ready for a fight they thought they could control, but their frustration, paired with the overwhelming response from police, led to their end. What happened in North Hollywood that day left a mark on American law enforcement that won't be forgotten. It was December 4th, 2010 in Dusseldorf, Germany. The popular TV show Wetten Das was broadcasting live to millions. Known for its wild stunts and celebrity appearances, the show had something special lined up that night. 23-year-old Samuel Koch, an aspiring stuntman, was ready to perform a dangerous act that could launch his career or end it. Koch had trained for weeks. The plan was to jump over 5 moving cars using spring-loaded stilts, which allowed him to leap high into the air. He would perform somersaults over the cars and land safely on the other side. Each car would be slightly larger than the last, and the final one was to be driven by his own father. The challenge was risky, but Koch had done it in practice many times. Inside the studio, the crowd was excited. TV host Thomas Gottschalk welcomed the audience, and the show began. Koch looked calm and confident as he lined up for his first jump. He cleared the first car smoothly. The second attempt had to be stopped due to a mistake, but he remained focused. On the third jump, he landed perfectly, and the audience erupted in applause. Then came the fourth car, driven by his father. As it sped toward him, Koch leapt, but something went wrong. He mistimed the jump. His feet clipped the windshield, and he didn't gain enough height. His head slammed into the car, and his body went limp mid-air before crashing to the ground. The studio fell silent. Viewers at home watched in shock as medical staff rushed to him. Koch wasn't moving. The live broadcast quickly cut away, and the show was halted. A statement from producers soon confirmed he was seriously hurt. Doctors performed emergency surgery, but the injuries were severe. Two of Koch's cervical vertebrae were fractured. He had sustained damage to his spinal cord, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. News of the accident spread fast, and support poured in online. Even pop star Justin Bieber, who had been scheduled to appear on the show that night, tweeted his concern. His segment was canceled. The show's future was suddenly uncertain. Wetten Das had been on air for 29 years, but it had never experienced something like this. The broadcast was officially stopped 20 minutes after the accident. Public discussions began about whether the show's stunts were too dangerous. The show's producers said safety had always been a priority, but no amount of planning could change what had happened. Samuel's father, who was behind the wheel, was devastated. Despite the emotional weight, Koch's family stood by him and prepared for the long road ahead. Host Thomas Gottschalk was deeply affected. He had led the show for over 20 years, but this incident made him step back. Soon after, he resigned. His decision marked the end of an era for Wetten Das. In the weeks that followed, Koch's condition became clearer. Doctors confirmed that he would never regain movement below his neck. What had started as a career-defining stunt turned into a lifelong challenge. Koch later began speaking publicly, showing strength and determination despite his new reality. He focused on recovery and adjusting to life with a disability. Though the show was eventually suspended, Samuel Koch's story remained in the minds of those who watched it unfold. His accident raised serious questions about how far entertainment shows should go. But through it all, Koch became a symbol of resilience, reminding people not of a cautionary tale, but of someone who chose to keep moving forward.
The pristine waters surrounding the coral formations near Queensland, Australia, had long served as a backdrop for high-end fashion photography. On October 5, 2021, these same crystal-clear depths would become the site of one of the most tragic underwater modeling incidents in recent history. The area, renowned for its exceptional visibility extending beyond 60 meters, attracted photographers from around the globe seeking to capture ethereal underwater imagery. Maya Collins, a 26-year-old fashion model from Brisbane, had built her career on specialized underwater shoots. Her ability to hold her breath for extended periods and move gracefully while submerged made her highly sought after in the niche market of aquatic fashion photography. The project that brought her to these remote waters was an ambitious collaboration with renowned photographer Sebastian Hartwell and his assistant team of 5 experienced divers. Hartwell had spent months planning the shoot, which involved capturing Collins in flowing designer gowns that would create dramatic silhouettes against the coral backdrop. The concept required Collins to descend to approximately 20 feet below the surface, where the interplay of natural light and fabric movement would create the desired artistic effect. Safety protocols included multiple dive masters, emergency oxygen supplies, and constant communication via underwater hand signals. The morning conditions appeared ideal for their ambitious project. Water temperature held steady at 26 degrees Celsius, with minimal current and exceptional visibility. Collins had completed her safety briefing and equipment check, wearing a specially designed weighted belt that would allow her to achieve neutral buoyancy while maintaining graceful movement in the flowing gowns. The first series of shots proceeded flawlessly. Collins descended gracefully, her emerald silk dress billowing around her like liquid mercury. Hartwell positioned himself 15 feet away, his underwater camera housing capturing the interplay of sunlight filtering through the fabric. The assistant divers maintained their positions around the perimeter, monitoring both Collins and the surrounding water for any potential hazards. 23 minutes into the session, Collins was preparing for her most challenging pose. The sequence required her to suspend herself horizontally at 20 feet depth, arms extended upward toward the surface, while the gown's fabric created an otherworldly silhouette. Hartwell had calculated the lighting angles precisely, and the entire team held their positions to capture what they anticipated would be the signature image of the collection. The tiger shark approached from the deeper water beyond the coral formation, drawn by the unusual activity and surface splashing from the support boat above. Measuring approximately 13 feet in length, the predator moved with the calculated precision of an apex hunter that had survived decades in these waters. Its distinctive striped pattern remained partially camouflaged against the shifting light patterns filtering down from the surface. Collins was fully focused on maintaining her pose when the attack occurred. The shark struck with devastating speed, its powerful jaws clamping around her legs with crushing force. The impact sent shockwaves through the water as Collins was violently yanked from her suspended position. Her carefully controlled breathing technique immediately collapsed as panic and pain overwhelmed her system. Hartwell and his dive team witnessed the attack unfold in horrifying slow motion. The photographer immediately dropped his camera equipment and swam toward Collins, while his assistants began striking their dive tanks with metal objects to create noise and distraction. The metallic clanging echoed through the water, as the team deployed every deterrent technique they had trained for. The tiger shark's thrashing intensified as it dragged Collins deeper toward the coral formation. Her flowing gown, which had created such beautiful imagery moments before, now tangled around both predator and victim. The silk fabric restricted Collins' movements while potentially confusing the shark's sensory systems. Two of the dive masters reached the attack site and began striking the shark with their diving knives and camera equipment. The predator's hide proved remarkably resistant to their desperate attempts at intervention. Collins disappeared beneath the shark's bulk as it continued its characteristic side-to-side thrashing motion. After nearly 90 seconds of chaos, the tiger shark released its grip and retreated toward deeper water. The dive team immediately surrounded Collins, but her injuries proved catastrophic. Despite their advanced training and immediate response, the combination of massive trauma and prolonged submersion had proven fatal. The emergency ascent and surface rescue procedures were executed flawlessly, but Collins was pronounced dead upon reaching the support vessel. The entire attack had been inadvertently captured on Hartwell's underwater cameras, providing marine biologists with unprecedented footage of tiger shark predatory behavior in shallow reef environments. Australian authorities later confirmed unusually high tiger shark activity throughout the region that month. Marine biologists theorized that changing water temperatures and abundant fish populations had drawn larger predators into areas typically considered safe for diving activities. The incident prompted immediate changes to underwater photography safety protocols, including mandatory shark spotting procedures and the presence of armed dive masters during all commercial shoots in open water environments. Hartwell discontinued underwater fashion photography following the tragedy, while Collins's family established a foundation promoting water safety education. The incident remains one of the most documented fatal shark attacks in Australian waters, serving as a sobering reminder that even controlled professional environments cannot eliminate the inherent risks of entering the ocean's domain. The waters surrounding Gansby, South Africa, have earned their reputation as one of the world's most concentrated great white shark hunting grounds. This coastal region, often referred to by marine biologists as the white shark capital of the world, attracted both cage diving tourists and serious sport fishermen seeking to experience encounters with apex predators in their natural environment. The area's unique underwater topography created ideal conditions for seal colonies, which in turn supported healthy populations of massive great whites. On February 5, 2023, Marcus van Heerden, a 28-year-old engineering student from Cape Town, had organized the fishing expedition as a celebration of his recent graduation. His companions for the day included his childhood friend Peter Kruger and university roommate David Chen, both experienced recreational fishermen who had joined Van Heerden on numerous previous trips along the South African coast. The trio had chartered a modest 24-foot sport fishing vessel, equipped with standard safety equipment and enough supplies for a full day on the water. Van Heerden had specifically chosen the Gansby area despite its reputation for shark activity, believing that the abundant marine life would provide exceptional fishing opportunities. Local charter operators had briefed them on basic shark safety protocols, though the emphasis remained on locating productive fishing spots rather than predator avoidance. The morning conditions appeared ideal, with minimal wind and excellent visibility extending beyond the harbor mouth. The first 4 hours of fishing proved moderately successful, with the group landing several yellowtail and a small tuna. Van Heerden demonstrated particular enthusiasm for the technical aspects of deep-sea angling, frequently adjusting their position to optimize fishing conditions based on his understanding of underwater currents and fish behavior patterns. His engineering background had instilled a methodical approach to problem-solving that translated well to sport fishing strategy. At approximately 2:15 p.m., Van Heerden was attempting to secure a tangled fishing line that had become wrapped around the boat's stern cleat. The line had snagged during their previous catch, creating a complex knot that threatened to damage their equipment if not properly addressed. Kruger and Chen continued fishing from the bow, while Van Heerden worked methodically to untangle the mess without cutting the expensive braided line. The great white shark that had been tracking their boat measured approximately 17 feet in length and weighed close to 4,000 pounds. Marine biologists would later estimate its age at over 20 years, making it a mature adult that had survived decades in these predator-rich waters. The shark had been following the scent trail created by their fish catch, along with the electromagnetic signatures generated by the boat's engine and electronic equipment. Van Heerden was leaning over the stern rail, both hands occupied with the tangled fishing line. When the predator struck, The massive shark launched itself from the depths with extraordinary force, its momentum carrying its bulk partially out of the water as it collided with the boat's hull. The impact generated a thunderous crash that could be heard over a kilometer away, while the vessel rocked violently from the collision. The force of the strike knocked Van Heerden completely off balance, sending him tumbling headfirst into the churning water beside the boat. Kruger and Chen witnessed their friends fall with growing horror as they realized the shark remained in the immediate vicinity. The predator's dorsal fin, easily the size of a dinner plate, circled ominously around Van Heerden as he struggled to swim back toward the boat. Van Heerden managed to call out once before the shark struck again. This time, the great white attacked with the calculated precision of a seasoned hunter, its massive jaws engulfing Van Heerden's torso with crushing force. The attack occurred less than 10 meters from the boat, allowing Kruger and Chen to witness every horrific detail as their friend disappeared beneath the roiling surface. Both survivors immediately began shouting and striking the water with fishing equipment in a desperate attempt to distract the predator. Chen deployed the boat's emergency flares while Kruger activated their radio distress beacon, though they realized that help could not arrive in time to save Van Heerden. The shark's thrashing movements created a spreading slick of blood that attracted additional predators from the surrounding area. The great white surfaced briefly with Van Heerden still clenched in its jaws, the victim showing no signs of movement or consciousness. The shark then dove toward deeper water, dragging its prey beyond the reach of any rescue attempt. Kruger and Chen continued their distress calls while scanning the surface for any sign of their friend, though they understood the futility of their efforts. South African Maritime Rescue Services arrived at the scene within 37 minutes of receiving the distress call. By that time, multiple shark fins were visible in the area, drawn by the blood and commotion. The rescue team conducted an extensive search pattern covering several square kilometers, but Van Heerden's body was never recovered. Marine authorities later confirmed that great white activity had reached unusually high levels throughout the region. Several factors contributed to this phenomenon, including abundant seal populations, optimal water temperatures, and minimal commercial fishing pressure. The incident prompted immediate changes to local charter boat safety protocols, including mandatory shark spotting procedures and enhanced emergency response equipment. Kruger and Chen both testified at the subsequent maritime safety inquiry, providing detailed accounts that helped investigators understand the attack sequence. Both survivors required extensive counseling to address the psychological trauma of witnessing their friend's death. The incident remains one of the most thoroughly documented fatal great white attacks in South African waters, serving as a sobering reminder of the risks inherent in recreational boating within known predator habitats. Tidal estuaries surrounding Darwin, Northern Australia, represented some of the most biodiverse wetland ecosystems in the Southern Hemisphere as of March 2025. These brackish waterways, where freshwater rivers merged with saltwater tides, created unique environmental conditions that supported an extraordinary variety of marine life. However, the same factors that made these waters ecologically rich also attracted some of Australia's most dangerous predators, including crocodiles and various shark species that thrived in the murky, nutrient-rich environment. Jackson Reed, a 22-year-old adventure tourism guide from Brisbane, had built his reputation on leading kayaking expeditions through remote waterways that conventional tour operators considered too challenging or risky. His clients sought authentic wilderness experiences far from crowded tourist destinations, and Reed's expertise in reading water conditions and wildlife behavior made him highly sought after among serious adventure enthusiasts. The expedition that brought him to these particular waters involved a group of experienced kayakers seeking to photograph rare bird species that nested in the remote mangrove formations. Reed had scouted these estuaries during the previous dry season, mapping safe passages through the complex network of channels and identifying optimal wildlife viewing locations. The area remained largely unexplored by commercial tourism, partly due to its remoteness and partly because of well-documented predator activity that made swimming or wading extremely dangerous. Local Aboriginal guides had warned Reed about unusual bull shark behavior in these waters, though their concerns were often dismissed by visiting tourists as exaggerated caution. The morning of March 18th presented ideal conditions for kayaking, with calm winds and a rising tide that would provide access to shallow channels typically impassable during low water periods. Reed's group consisted of 4 experienced paddlers, including wildlife photographer Amanda Chen, retired marine biologist Dr. Elizabeth Thompson, and adventure travel writer Marcus Hoffman. Each participant carried waterproof camera equipment and had signed comprehensive liability waivers, acknowledging the inherent risks of wilderness kayaking. Reed positioned himself at the rear of the group formation, allowing him to monitor all participants while maintaining visual contact with potential hazards ahead. His leadership strategy emphasized constant communication and predetermined emergency procedures, including specific protocols for wildlife encounters and equipment failures. The group had practiced capsizing recovery techniques in controlled conditions, though Reed privately hoped such skills would remain unnecessary during their expedition. 3 hours into their journey, the group reached a narrow channel bordered by dense mangrove formations that created a natural photography blind for observing waterbird behavior. Reed guided his clients into position for optimal camera angles while maintaining safe distances from known nesting areas. The tidal current remained gentle, allowing the kayakers to maintain stable positions without constant paddling effort. Reed was adjusting his underwater camera housing when he noticed an unusual water disturbance approximately 10 meters ahead of his kayak. The murky water made visual identification impossible, but his experience in these environments had taught him to recognize subtle signs of large predator movement. He began alerting his group to prepare for immediate evacuation from the narrow channel when the bull shark struck without warning. The 9-foot predator launched itself from the muddy bottom with explosive force, its massive bulk colliding with Reed's kayak amidships. The impact generated a tremendous crash that echoed across the mangrove canopy, while simultaneously capsizing Reed's vessel and throwing him into the turbid water. The bull shark's jaws immediately clamped around Reed's forearm and shoulder, its serrated teeth penetrating through his life jacket and into his flesh. Reed's training took over despite the overwhelming pain and shock of the attack. He used his free hand to strike repeatedly at the shark's sensitive snout area, while simultaneously kicking to prevent the predator from dragging him underwater. The bull shark's thrashing movements created a maelstrom of muddy water that made it impossible for his companions to assess the situation accurately. Jen immediately began paddling toward Reed's position, while Thompson activated their emergency satellite beacon to alert rescue services. Hoffman documented the attack with his camera equipment, understanding that such footage might prove crucial for subsequent investigation and safety improvements. The entire group had rehearsed emergency response procedures, though none had anticipated an actual predator encounter of this magnitude. The bull shark maintained its grip on Reed while simultaneously attempting to execute the spinning maneuver characteristic of its species during feeding behavior. Reed found himself being rotated violently through the water column, his disorientation increasing with each revolution. The predator's strength proved overwhelming, and Reed realized that passive resistance would prove ineffective against such a powerful adversary. Chen reached the attack site and began striking the shark with her kayak paddle, while Thompson approached from the opposite angle to prevent the predator from escaping toward deeper water. The coordinated intervention created enough distraction to cause the bull shark to momentarily loosen its grip, allowing Reed to break partially free from its jaws. However, the predator's hunting instincts remained fully engaged, and it immediately launched a second attack aimed at Reed's legs and lower torso. This time, Reed managed to grab the shark's snout with both hands, using his body weight to force the animal's head underwater while simultaneously kicking to maintain surface position. The technique, learned during his guide training, provided temporary control over the situation. After nearly 2 minutes of chaotic struggle, the bull shark finally retreated toward the deeper water beyond the mangrove roots. Reed's companions immediately surrounded him, providing flotation support while assessing his injuries. The attack had caused severe lacerations to his arm and shoulder, along with significant tissue damage and blood loss that required immediate medical attention. The group's emergency procedures proved effective, with rescue helicopters reaching their position within 41 minutes of the initial distress signal. Reed was airlifted directly to a hospital, where emergency surgery addressed his injuries and prevented permanent disability. His survival was attributed largely to his companion's quick response and his own knowledge of shark behavior during attacks. Northern Territory authorities later confirmed that bull shark activity had reached unusually high levels throughout the region, with multiple encounters reported in various estuarine environments. Marine biologists theorized that seasonal flooding had driven larger predators into shallow waters where they typically avoided human contact. Reed recovered fully from his injuries after several months of rehabilitation, though he subsequently modified his guiding activities to focus on terrestrial rather than aquatic adventures. The incident prompted enhanced safety protocols for kayaking operations in northern Australia, including mandatory predator spotting training and improved emergency communication equipment.
It was December 29, 1995, in Buffalo, New York. Donald Herbert, a firefighter, was responding to a house fire when the roof suddenly gave way. Trapped under the debris, he was deprived of oxygen for nearly 6 minutes before rescuers pulled him out. The damage to his brain was severe, leaving him in a coma. For months, he remained unresponsive, showing no signs of awareness. His wife Linda and their 4 children, aged 14, 13, 11, and 3, were devastated. Donald was no longer the man they knew. He was blind, unable to speak, and did not recognize his surroundings. Though he sometimes moved slightly, there was no real sign of improvement. He spent his days in a nursing home, completely disconnected from his former life. Doctors did what they could, but there was little hope. Years passed with barely any change. Medical care and therapy kept him stable, but he remained in a near-vegetative state. As time went on, his case seemed hopeless. Then on April 30th, 2005, but almost 10 years later, something astonishing happened. The nursing home called his family with shocking news. Donald was talking. At first, no one believed it, but for the next 14 hours, he spoke nonstop, reconnecting with his loved ones in a way they had long thought impossible. When Linda arrived, Donald looked at her and asked, "Where have you been?" He had no memory of the past decade. When his family told him how much time had passed, he was in disbelief, asking, "How long have I been away?" For the first time in 10 years, he was fully aware. He asked his children about their lives, wanting to know everything he had missed. He listened as they told him about the world's changes and what had happened while he was unconscious. Doctors were stunned. Brain injury patients typically show signs of recovery early on, not after nearly a decade. Medical experts began searching for an explanation. They suspected a combination of medications, commonly used for conditions like Parkinson's disease and ADHD, may have played a role. These weren't a cure, but they might have temporarily restored his awareness. News of Donald's sudden improvement spread quickly. His story made headlines, and people were amazed by the firefighter who unexpectedly regained consciousness after so many years. His case was compared to other rare instances like Terry Wallace, who woke up after 19 years, and Gary Dockery, a police officer who spoke after years of silence. Unfortunately, Donald's improvement didn't last. After that incredible 14-hour period, his ability to speak and interact faded. Though he had occasional moments of conversation with his family, his condition slowly worsened. He suffered frequent infections and was repeatedly hospitalized. As the months passed, his body grew weaker. On February 21, 2006, Donald Herbert passed away at the age of 44 due to complications from pneumonia. His family was by his side, grieving the loss of the man they had miraculously reconnected with, even if only for a short time. Donald's story wasn't just about his bravery as a firefighter. It was about resilience and the extraordinary moment he shared with his family. Linda and their children had never given up on him, even when doctors had little hope. For nearly a decade, his children grew up without their father's presence, but they were given one final chance to talk to him before he was gone. His case raised many unanswered questions. How could someone regain awareness after so many years? Was it the medications, an unexplained medical event, or something beyond scientific understanding? Many families with loved ones in similar conditions reached out to Donald's doctors, hoping that the same treatment might bring their relatives back, even for a brief moment. Donald was laid to rest in Holy Cross Cemetery in Lackawanna, New York. He was honored not just for his service as a firefighter, but also for the mystery surrounding his final days. His case remains one of the most fascinating recoveries in medical history. Though years have passed, Donald's story continues to captivate and inspire. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the unexpected can still happen. 2016, and the Polish morning show, Pitni na Śniadanie, was airing another lively episode. The hosts were chatting, the mood was upbeat, and everything seemed normal. But that day would take a shocking turn, making it one of the most unforgettable moments in live television history. The guest was Marcin Poloniewicz, a magician known for his daring tricks. He had been a semi-finalist on Poland's Got Talent and was invited to perform a stunt involving 4 brown paper bags, one of which contained a hidden sharp nail. The trick was simple. The show's host, Marzyna Rogalska, would press her hand onto a bag while Marcin ensured it wasn't the one with the nail. During rehearsals, everything went smoothly. Marcin carefully set up the bags and the trick worked as expected. But when it was time to perform live, things went terribly wrong. With cameras rolling, Marcin instructed Marzyna to participate. Trusting his expertise, she followed along. But as she slammed her hand down, a piercing scream filled the studio. Marcin had miscalculated, and Marzyna's hand landed on the bag with the nail inside. The pain was immediate. The nail went straight through her palm, and as she pulled her hand back, it remained lodged in her skin. The studio fell into stunned silence. Marzena clutched her injured hand, her face filled with shock. At first, Marson seemed confused, even nervously laughing, thinking it was part of the act. But when he saw the nail, his expression changed. Panic set in as he rushed to help, pulling the nail from Marzena's hand in a desperate attempt to minimize the injury. "I really pierced her," he muttered, horrified. Crew members quickly stepped in, escorting Marzena off the set and rushing her to the hospital. What was meant to be a simple magic trick had turned into a serious accident, played out in real time for viewers at home. Later, Marzena took to social media to reassure everyone. She explained that the trick had worked perfectly during rehearsals and emphasized that Marson hadn't meant for this to happen. "It was an accident," she wrote, asking people not to blame him. She also thanked her followers for their support and assured them she was recovering. Despite her attempts to calm the situation, the footage quickly spread online. The clip of the accident went viral, shocking viewers worldwide. Many questioned how Marson could have made such a mistake. Some even speculated that it might have permanently damaged his career. As criticism mounted, Marzena defended him again, saying, "The internet is being harsh on him. He didn't mean for this to happen." She had forgiven him and hoped others would too, but not everyone was as understanding. Social media was flooded with comments, some mocking the mishap. One person wrote, "How to end a magic career in 10 seconds." Another said, "She handled it better than I would have." Others admired Marzena's composure and willingness to move on from the incident. The aftermath was difficult for both Marzena and Marcin. While she recovered physically, the emotional impact lingered. For Marcin, the backlash was intense. Even though the trick had been rehearsed without issues, one misstep had led to public scrutiny and doubts about his abilities. The incident also raised concerns about performing high-risk stunts on live television. Even with preparation, mistakes could happen, and the consequences could be severe. While Marcin's intent was never to cause harm, this accident showed just how unpredictable live performances could be. Years later, the footage of Marzena's injury still circulates online, a lasting reminder of that unforgettable moment. What was meant to be entertainment turned into a real-life emergency, proving that even the most well-planned performances can go terribly wrong. In the end, Marzena's response stood out the most. Despite the pain, she chose to forgive, showing an understanding that not everyone in her position would have. The accident was a moment in television history that won't be forgotten anytime soon. March 6, 1995, started as a normal day in Lake Orion, Michigan. Scott Amador, a 32-year-old bartender known for his outgoing personality, appeared on The Jenny Jones Show, a daytime talk show famous for its dramatic surprises. He had agreed to participate in a segment called Secret Crush, where guests revealed romantic feelings for someone in their life. Scott's secret crush was 24-year-old Jonathan Schmitz, someone he had known for years. Jonathan had no idea he would be the subject of the surprise. When the reveal happened, he appeared uncomfortable but laughed it off, saying he was definitely heterosexual. The moment seemed light-hearted, and the two men hugged before the segment ended. But what seemed like harmless entertainment on television would soon lead to an unimaginable tragedy. 3 days later, on March 9th, Scott was dead. That morning, he left a playful note in Jonathan's mailbox, possibly hoping to continue their interaction. But instead of laughter, the note triggered something far more serious. Jonathan, feeling embarrassed and overwhelmed, withdrew money from his bank account and bought a shotgun. He then drove to Scott's mobile home in Lake Orion. When Scott answered the door, Jonathan asked if he had left the note. Scott confirmed it, reportedly smiling, unaware of the danger. In a sudden act of rage, Jonathan retrieved the gun from his car and returned. Without warning, he fired twice, hitting Scott in the chest. Jonathan immediately left, drove to a gas station, and called 911. He calmly admitted to what he had done, saying he acted out of humiliation following the television show appearance. Police quickly arrested him, and the shocking case soon became known as the Jenny Jones murder. During the investigation, questions arose about whether Jonathan had been misled by the show's producers. They claimed he had been informed that his secret admirer could be either male or female, but Jonathan insisted he thought it would be a woman. His defense attorneys argued that he acted out of extreme emotional distress, citing his past struggles with mental health conditions. Scott's family was devastated. His brother, Frank Amador Jr., spoke out against both Jonathan and the Jenny Jones Show, believing the producers had exploited Scott for entertainment. The case sparked debates about media responsibility and the ethics of reality television. Jonathan was charged with first-degree murder, but his defense team argued that he had reacted impulsively under pressure. In 1996, he was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. However, his conviction was later overturned on appeal. After a retrial in 1999, he was found guilty again and sent back to prison. Despite his sentence, Jonathan was released on parole in 2017 after serving 22 years. His release sparked further debate. Some believed he had paid his dues, while others, including Scott's family, felt he had never truly shown remorse. Jeffrey Feger, the Amador family's attorney, criticized the justice system for allowing Jonathan to walk free, especially since he had never issued a public apology. Meanwhile, Scott's family pursued legal action against the Jenny Jones Show and its parent company, Warner Brothers. They argued that the show had irresponsibly set up the segment, creating an embarrassing situation that led to Scott's death. In 1999, the family won a $29.3 million lawsuit. However, the decision was later overturned, with the court ruling that the show could not have predicted what would happen after the episode was filmed. The case remained a significant example of how sensationalized media can have unintended and tragic consequences. It was revisited in true crime documentaries, including Netflix's Trial by Media and Dark Side of the 90s, which explored how talk shows of that era often prioritized shock value over the well-being of their guests. While the Jenny Jones Show was never legally held responsible, the incident raised lasting concerns about media ethics. Could Scott's life have been spared if Jonathan had been given more information? If the show had taken a different approach, would things have ended differently? The shocking events surrounding Scott Amador's death exposed the darker side of reality television, where personal emotions are turned into entertainment, sometimes with irreversible consequences.